On the morning of February 23, 1943, a German recovery crew arrived at a muddy field near Sbeitla, Tunisia. They had orders to retrieve an American tank, an M4A1 Sherman, serial number WH-058941, that had been captured the day before by Panzer Abteilung 501. The Sherman sat intact. Its crew had abandoned it during the chaotic Battle of Sidi. No visible combat damage, no broken tracks, the engine compartment undamaged. The Americans had simply left it behind. The German recovery team worked methodically. They drained remaining fuel, disconnected the batteries, secured the hatches. This was standard procedure for captured enemy equipment. Within hours, the Sherman was loaded onto a trailer. The Germans intended to drive it to Tunis, 350 kilometers north. The journey would take 4.5 days. What those recovery crews did not know was that this particular Sherman, nicknamed War Daddy 2, painted in white letters across its glacis plate, would travel much farther than Tunis. Within weeks, it would be aboard a ship crossing the Mediterranean. By spring of 1943, it would be sitting at Kummersdorf, Germany's primary tank testing facility, approximately 100 kilometers south of Berlin. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. And at Kummersdorf, German tank commanders, engineers, and high-ranking Wehrmacht officials would discover something that contradicted everything German propaganda had told them about American tanks. They would discover that the Sherman, which German newsreels mocked as inferior, represented an engineering philosophy fundamentally different from their own. A philosophy that prioritized reliability over sophistication, simplicity over complexity, functionality over specifications. And that philosophy, more than any single technical advantage, was helping America win the war. The Kummersdorf testing facility had been Germany's primary armor evaluation center since 1936. Every new German tank design passed through its gates. Every captured enemy vehicle that could be made operational ended up there. By early 1943, the facility had tested British Matilda and Churchill tanks, Soviet T-34s, and now, for the first time, examples of American armor. The Sherman arrived at Kummersdorf in late March 1943. Test engineers marked its armor thickness in white paint, 80 millimeters on the glacis plate at 56 degrees, 50 millimeters on the turret front, 38 millimeters on the hull sides. They stenciled these measurements directly onto the tank's hull, creating a visual reference for photographic documentation. Surviving photographs show War Daddy 2 sitting in the Kummersdorf testing yard, its name still visible, surrounded by German tanks for comparison. The testing protocol was straightforward. German engineers would subject the Sherman to the same evaluations they used for their own tanks: mobility tests, endurance runs, mechanical inspections, engine performance analysis. The goal was to understand American tank design philosophy, identify weaknesses that could be exploited in combat, and determine whether any features might be worth incorporating into German designs. What they discovered surprised them. The Sherman's engine was a Continental R975, a gasoline-powered radial aircraft engine adapted for ground use, 425 horsepower, air-cooled, 9 cylinders arranged in a star pattern. German engineers recognized immediately that this was not a purpose-designed tank engine. It was an existing engine repurposed for a new application. In German military thinking, this seemed like a compromise, like accepting inferior performance for the sake of production expediency. But when they ran the engine, it performed flawlessly. It started on the first attempt. Cold starts presented no difficulties. The engine idled smoothly. Temperature gauges remained stable. Oil pressure held steady. The cooling system maintained proper temperatures without overheating. The transmission shifted cleanly through all gears. No grinding, no hesitation. The controls responded precisely. German test drivers drove War Daddy 2 around the Kummersdorf testing grounds. They noted that the tank handled well on roads. Cross-country performance was adequate, though not exceptional. Maximum speed of approximately 38 kilometers per hour matched German specifications. The suspension absorbed bumps without excessive harshness. The crew compartment was spacious compared to German tanks. Visibility from the commander's cupola was good, but it was the mechanical reliability that struck them most forcefully. The Sherman required minimal maintenance. Oil changes were straightforward. Air filters were easily accessible. Track tension could be adjusted with basic tools. The engine could be removed for service through large access panels in the rear deck. Every major component was designed for field replacement. Nothing required specialized equipment. Nothing demanded factory-level expertise. For German engineers accustomed to the complexity of Maybach engines and intricate Panther transmissions, this simplicity seemed almost primitive. How could such an unsophisticated machine be effective in modern armored warfare? The answer became clear when they examined their own tanks with fresh eyes. By spring 1943, German tank design had evolved into increasingly complex machines. The Tiger I, which had entered service in late 1942, weighed 57 tons. Its Maybach HL-210 P45 engine produced 650 horsepower from 21 liters of displacement. The later HL-230 produced 700 horsepower. These were powerful engines, but they were also temperamental. The Tiger's engine ran hot. The aluminum cylinder block and heads, designed to save weight, conducted heat poorly in the confined engine compartment. Overheating was common, especially in warm climates. Cracks developed in the block. Cylinder head gaskets failed frequently. Cross-contamination of coolant and oil occurred regularly. Compression leaks rendered engines non-functional. Replacement of cylinder blocks or heads became routine maintenance rather than exceptional repair. German logistics calculated that with the Tiger's fuel capacity of 568 liters across 4 tanks, operational range was 195 kilometers on roads, 110 kilometers off-road. This assumed optimal conditions. In practice, fuel consumption often exceeded these estimates. The Maybach engine consumed approximately 2.75 gallons per mile. The Tiger's operational range was severely limited, but the fuel consumption was not the most serious problem. The engine itself was the problem. German field reports from Tiger units documented recurring mechanical failures. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion reported in May 1943 that engine overheating caused frequent operational interruptions. Tiger crews learned to monitor coolant temperature constantly. They learned to reduce speed when temperatures climbed. They learned that extended operation at full power invited catastrophic failure. The Tiger's engine could not be reliably operated at maximum output of 3,000 revolutions per minute. The Tiger Fibel, the Tiger Crew Manual, recommended no more than 2,600 revolutions per minute. Even at reduced power settings, the engine required constant attention. Oil consumption was high. Gasket failures were routine. Mechanical breakdowns occurred with alarming frequency. Test engineers at Kummersdorf understood these problems intimately. They had evaluated every Tiger prototype. They had documented every failure mode. They knew the Tiger's weaknesses as well as its strengths. And now, examining the captured Sherman, they confronted an uncomfortable realization. The Sherman was more reliable than the Tiger, not more powerful, not better armored, not superior in firepower, but more reliable, more maintainable, more likely to still be running at the end of a week of continuous operations. And in armored warfare, a tank that runs is more valuable than a tank that breaks down, regardless of how impressive its specifications appear on paper. German High Command understood this problem. They had understood it since the Tiger's introduction. Internal Wehrmacht documents from late 1942 and early 1943 expressed concern about Tiger reliability. Field commanders complained that Tigers required 10 hours of maintenance for every hour of operation. Spare parts consumption exceeded projections. Trained mechanics were in short supply. The Tiger demanded resources that Germany increasingly lacked. But German military culture emphasized technical sophistication. The belief that superior engineering would compensate for numerical inferiority was deeply embedded in German strategic thinking. From precision optics to advanced metallurgy, German industry had built its reputation on quality over quantity. The Tiger embodied this philosophy. Thick armor, powerful gun, sophisticated transmission, complex suspension, every system engineered to maximum performance standards. The Americans had chosen a different path. The Sherman's design prioritized producibility. Continental radial engines were already in mass production for aircraft. Adapting them for tanks was faster and cheaper than developing new purpose-built engines. The transmission used automotive components, scaled up for heavier loads. The suspension was simple and robust. The hull could be manufactured in multiple variants using different engines and transmissions without major redesign. Every choice emphasized rapid production and ease of maintenance. By February 1943, American factories were producing Shermans at a rate German factories could not match. The Fisher Tank Arsenal in Michigan could build 140 Shermans per month. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal produced 400 per month at peak production. Multiple additional factories across the United States contributed to total Sherman production. Germany, by comparison, struggled to produce 25 Tigers per month in early 1943. Production would eventually peak at 104 per month by 1944. But this came far too late. The industrial capacity simply did not exist to mass-produce complex machines like the Tiger. Each Tiger required more man-hours to build than 3 or 4 Sherman tanks. Each Tiger consumed scarce alloy metals. Each Tiger demanded skilled assembly workers. The Sherman could be built by semi-skilled workers using standard manufacturing techniques. The Tiger required master craftsmen. At Kummersdorf, Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, visited personally to examine War Daddy 2. Photographs survive, showing Speer sitting in the commander's hatch looking down at German officers gathered around the Sherman. The symbolism was unintentional, but profound. Here was the man responsible for German war production, sitting inside an American tank that represented everything German industry was failing to achieve: mass production, reliability, simplicity, standardization. The Germans found the Sherman well-built, reliable, and comfortable. This assessment appeared in official reports. German evaluators acknowledged that American manufacturing quality was consistently high. Welds were clean, castings were sound, components fit precisely. There was no evidence of shoddy workmanship or inadequate quality control. The Americans were producing tanks rapidly, but they were not sacrificing quality. This realization challenged German assumptions about industrial warfare. German propaganda had portrayed American industry as quantity without quality, mass production without craftsmanship. The Sherman proved otherwise. It demonstrated that mass production and quality were not mutually exclusive. The Americans had simply chosen different priorities. But the Sherman had weaknesses. German test crews identified them methodically. The 75mm M3 gun had mediocre armor penetration compared to German tank guns. At 1,000 meters, the Sherman's gun could penetrate approximately 88 millimeters of armor plate at 90 degrees. This was adequate against Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, but insufficient against Tiger frontal armor. The Tiger's 88mm KK-36 gun could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor from 2,100 meters. In a direct engagement, the Tiger had overwhelming firepower advantage. The Sherman's armor was thin by German standards, maximum thickness of 76 millimeters compared to the Tiger's 120 millimeters of frontal armor. The Sherman could not withstand hits from German 88mm guns. German anti-tank weapons could destroy Shermans at ranges where Sherman guns could not effectively engage German heavy tanks. German intelligence officers compiled these findings into tactical recommendations: exploit the Sherman's thin armor, engage at long range where German guns have advantage, target the ammunition storage. The Sherman used dry stowage for 75mm rounds, making ammunition fires more likely when the tank was penetrated. But these tactical advantages, however real, did not address the fundamental strategic problem. Germany was producing Tigers that broke down constantly. America was producing Shermans that kept running. This disparity manifested most clearly in operational availability rates. German military statistics tracked the percentage of tanks operational on any given date. For the Tiger, in the second half of 1943, operational availability averaged 36%. This meant that of every 100 Tigers assigned to combat units, only 36 were actually capable of combat on average. The remaining 64 were undergoing repairs, awaiting spare parts, or broken down. For comparison, the Panzer IV averaged 48% operational availability. The Stu G3 assault gun averaged 65%. German medium tanks and assault guns, simpler and more reliable than heavy tanks, could be kept operational more consistently. American Sherman operational availability rates were significantly higher. Exact figures varied by theater and time period, but Shermans typically maintained operational rates above 60%, sometimes exceeding 70%. The reliability advantage translated directly into tactical advantage. More Shermans were available when needed. Fewer were sitting idle awaiting repairs. The implications were strategic. A Tiger might be superior to a Sherman in direct combat, but if the Tiger was undergoing engine repairs while the Sherman was operational, the Sherman's crew would fight and the Tiger's crew would wait. Tactical superiority meant nothing if mechanical unreliability prevented deployment. German tank commanders understood this reality firsthand. They experienced it every day in combat units. Otto Carius stood beside his Tiger tank in the frozen landscape near Leningrad in January 1944. He was 21 years old, a sergeant in the 502 Heavy Panzer Battalion. He had been rejected twice for military service for being underweight. His father had called tanks metal death traps, but Carius had volunteered for the Panzer branch anyway, and by early 1944 he was already establishing a reputation as one of Germany's most effective tank commanders. Carius understood tanks. He understood how they moved, how they fought, how they broke down. He had started his career in a Panzer 38T, a Czech-designed light tank pressed into German service. Simple machine, reliable enough. Then he transferred to Tiger units and entered a different world entirely. The Tiger was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Its 88mm gun could destroy Soviet T-34s at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor was virtually impenetrable to most Soviet anti-tank weapons. When the Tiger worked, it was the most formidable tank on any battlefield. But keeping it working required constant effort. Carius and his crew performed maintenance religiously. Every morning, they checked oil levels, inspected tracks, examined suspension components, verified that coolant levels were adequate. Every evening after operations, more maintenance, tighten track tension, check for oil leaks, inspect the engine compartment for problems, replace gaskets that had failed. This was normal. This was expected. This was how you kept a Tiger operational. But even with meticulous maintenance, things went wrong. The engine overheated. It overheated constantly. The cooling system, designed for a lighter tank, struggled with the Tiger's 57-ton weight. Extended operations at high power settings pushed coolant temperatures into dangerous ranges. Cylinder head gaskets failed under thermal stress. When gaskets failed, coolant and oil mixed. The engine lost compression. It had to be shut down immediately to prevent catastrophic damage. Oil consumption was excessive. The Maybach engine burned through lubricant at rates German logistics had not anticipated. Tiger units consumed oil faster than supply columns could deliver it. Crews learned to scavenge oil from disabled vehicles. They learned to stretch maintenance intervals beyond recommended limits. They learned to operate with oil levels lower than specifications allowed because proper quantities were unavailable. The transmission was fragile. The Maybach Olvara gearbox, a sophisticated pre-selector design with 8 forward gears and 4 reverse gears, provided excellent control when functioning properly. But it was complex. Each gear shift required precise synchronization of multiple clutches and bands. When components wore, shifts became rough. Gears stripped under heavy loads. The entire transmission could fail catastrophically, leaving the tank immobile. The final drives failed regularly. These units transmitted power from the gearbox to the drive sprockets. They operated under tremendous stress. The Tiger's weight exceeded what the final drives had been designed to handle. German field reports from Normandy in June 1944 noted that Tiger engines typically lasted 1,400 to 1,500 kilometers before requiring major overhaul. Final drives failed much sooner, often after just a few hundred kilometers. Steering was problematic. The Tiger used clutch and brake steering. To turn left, the driver disengaged the left track clutch and applied the left brake. The tank pivoted toward the slowed track. This system worked adequately on flat ground at moderate speeds. Under stress, in rough terrain, making sharp turns, the clutches burned. They overheated. Friction material degraded. Eventually, the clutches failed completely, leaving the tank unable to steer. And then there were the fires. Tiger engines caught fire with disturbing frequency. The problem had multiple causes. Fuel leaks from pump seals created pools of gasoline in the engine compartment. Oil leaked from valve covers and dripped onto hot exhaust manifolds. Carburetor overflow wet spark plugs and discharged unburnt fuel through exhaust gaskets, igniting on the exterior of the engine. When the engine backfired under load, the explosion could blow engine access hatches partially open and spray burning fuel throughout the compartment. Fire suppression systems were installed, but they were often removed because they interfered with engine maintenance and were too obtrusive. Crews relied on portable fire extinguishers and quick reactions, but not all fires could be controlled. German combat reports from throughout 1944 and 1945 repeatedly mentioned Tigers catching fire spontaneously, burning without having been hit by enemy weapons. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, visited Tiger units at Kursk in July 1943. He observed Tigers firsthand during the massive German offensive. His reports documented mechanical catastrophe. On July 5th, the first day of Operation Citadel, 200 Panthers and Tigers attacked Soviet defenses. By evening, only 40 tanks remained operational. The rest had broken down. Transmissions failed. Final drives broke. Engines overheated and caught fire. Steering systems failed. Panthers were burning spontaneously without being hit by enemy fire. Guderian recommended halting Panther production until fundamental problems could be resolved. His recommendation was ignored. Germany needed tanks desperately. The Eastern Front consumed armored vehicles at unsustainable rates. Production could not stop for engineering refinements. The approach was to make incremental improvements while continuing production and accepting high loss rates from mechanical failure. This was the reality carriers lived every day. Tigers that broke down more often than they fought. Engines that required constant nursing. Mechanical systems that failed under combat stress. And yet, when the Tiger worked, it was devastating. Carriers personally destroyed over 150 enemy tanks during his career. His tactics were aggressive. His gunnery was precise. His understanding of tank warfare was exceptional. But his success depended on keeping his Tiger operational, and that was never guaranteed. In July 1944, Carrius deployed his company in ambush near Dunaburg on the Latvian-Lithuanian border. Soviet forces were advancing. Intelligence indicated a major tank formation approaching. Carrius positioned 6 Tigers in concealed positions overlooking the Soviet approach route. He waited. The Soviet tanks appeared, JS-1 Stalin heavy tanks and T-34s. At least 50 vehicles advancing in column formation. Carrius and his wingman, Lieutenant Albert Kirscher, attacked first. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. 17 JS-1 Stalins destroyed, 5 T-34s knocked out. The remaining Soviet tanks, unaware of their lead company's destruction, continued advancing directly into Carrius's prepared ambush. 28 more tanks destroyed. Numerous trucks and support vehicles eliminated. An entire Soviet tank battalion annihilated for no German losses. This was the Tiger at its best. Devastating firepower, excellent optics, superior crew training, tactical brilliance. But getting those 6 Tigers into position for the ambush had required careful planning to avoid mechanical breakdowns. The Tigers that participated were the ones still operational. Others from the battalion were undergoing repairs. This was always the calculation. Not how many Tigers were assigned to the unit, but how many Tigers were actually functioning. Soviet tanker Dmitry Loza, who commanded Lend-Lease Sherman tanks on the Eastern Front, offered a different perspective. Loza's unit received American Shermans in late 1943. He had previously commanded British tanks and Soviet T-34s. The Sherman impressed him immediately. Reliability stood out first. The Sherman started consistently. Cold weather starts, which plagued Soviet tanks, presented minimal difficulties for the Sherman. The Continental radial engine turned over reliably in sub-zero temperatures. Once running, it required less warm-up time than Soviet engines. The transmission operated smoothly, even when cold. The controls remained responsive in winter conditions. The auxiliary power unit particularly impressed Soviet crews. The Sherman had a small gasoline engine mounted in the hull that could charge batteries and power turret traverse without running the main engine. This meant the crew could operate radios, lights, and traverse the turret while the main engine was shut down. Soviet tanks required the main engine to be running for all electrical systems, consuming fuel continuously. Ease of maintenance was another advantage. Routine service could be performed by the crew without specialized tools. Oil changes were straightforward, air filters were easily accessible. Track maintenance required no special equipment. When major repairs were needed, the Sherman's modular design allowed component replacement in field conditions. An entire engine could be swapped in a few hours with overhead lifting equipment. A Soviet T-34 required days to replace an engine, disassembling much of the tank in the process. The Sherman consumed less fuel than comparable Soviet tanks. Range was better. Operational endurance was superior. And perhaps most importantly, from a Soviet perspective, the Sherman kept running. Operational availability rates in Soviet units equipped with Shermans exceeded those of comparable units with Soviet tanks. Loza acknowledged the Sherman's disadvantages. Its high center of gravity made it less stable on slopes than the low-slung T-34. Its narrow tracks struggled in deep mud compared to the wider tracks of Soviet tanks. Its armor was thinner than Soviet heavy tanks. Its 75mm gun, while adequate, had less penetration than the Soviet 85mm gun. But the Sherman worked consistently, reliably, and in sustained combat operations, reliability mattered as much as firepower. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The comparison between German and American tank design philosophy crystallized around a single fundamental question: should tanks be optimized for peak performance or sustained operations? German engineers pursued peak performance, maximum armor thickness, highest gun velocity, most sophisticated suspension, every system pushed to the limits of contemporary engineering. The Tiger embodied this approach. When functioning properly, it was superior to almost any opponent. But achieving that peak performance required complexity, and complexity required maintenance. And maintenance required time, spare parts, skilled mechanics, and logistics infrastructure. American engineers pursued sustained operations, adequate armor for the mission, sufficient firepower for expected targets, reliable mechanical systems. Every design choice emphasized keeping the tank running. The Sherman embodied this approach. It was not optimized for any single metric. It was optimized for continuous availability. It was designed to still be fighting when German tanks were broken down, awaiting repairs. The strategic implications became visible in operational statistics. By late 1944, German heavy tank battalions typically had 30 to 40% of their tanks operational on any given date. American tank battalions typically had 60 to 70% operational. In practical terms, this meant that a German heavy tank battalion with 45 Tigers might have 15 operational. An American tank battalion with 54 Shermans might have 35 to 40 operational. The Germans compensated with superior crew training and tactical doctrine. Tiger battalions were elite formations with experienced commanders and well-trained crews. They were deployed to critical sectors where their heavy armor and powerful guns could make decisive differences. They were used as fire brigades rushing to threatened points to stabilize defensive lines or spearhead breakthrough attacks. But this constant redeployment caused excessive mechanical wear. Tigers were designed as breakthrough weapons, intended to advance slowly behind artillery preparation, engage enemy strong points at long range, and provide fire support for following infantry. Instead, they were being rushed from crisis to crisis, covering hundreds of kilometers on roads and cross-country, arriving exhausted with worn transmissions and overheated engines. The Panther tank suffered from similar problems, but worse. The Panther was rushed into production to meet Adolf Hitler's deadline for the Kursk offensive in July 1943. Design was finalized in January 1942. But testing was cut short. Production began before the design was mature. The result was catastrophic. Early production Panthers deployed to Kursk suffered mechanical failure rates exceeding combat losses. German military records document this in painful detail. Transmissions failed after minimal use. Final drives broke catastrophically. Engines overheated and caught fire frequently. Steering systems failed. Of 200 Panthers deployed for Operation Citadel on July 5, 1943, only 40 remained operational by evening. Most had broken down before seeing combat. German commanders filed detailed reports about Panther failures. Guderian's observations noted that final drives failed catastrophically, transmissions broke after minimal use, engines caught fire frequently. He recommended halting production until problems could be resolved. Again, his recommendation was ignored. Germany needed tanks. Production continued. Incremental improvements were made to later models, but fundamental design problems remained throughout the war. British testing of captured Panthers in 1944 and again in 1947-48 confirmed what German crews already knew. Every Panther tested failed mechanically before completing standard acceptance trials. One burned when the engine caught fire. One suffered steering clutch failure. One had transmission gears strip under load. One had its gearbox destroyed when a torsion bar broke and penetrated the housing. Not one Panther completed the full test program. All failed catastrophically from mechanical problems. The contrast with Sherman reliability was stark. British units that captured Panthers in combat and attempted to use them against German forces experienced constant mechanical problems. The Coldstream Guards operated a captured Panther named Cuckoo for nearly 3 months in Holland in autumn 1944. The tank required continuous maintenance. The engine leaked oil constantly. Fuel consumption was enormous. The steering needed frequent adjustment. The transmission made concerning noises throughout its service. Eventually, mechanical failure ended Cuckoo's operational life. The exact failure varied in historical accounts, but all agreed that mechanical breakdown, not enemy action, retired the tank. French forces had similar experiences. France operated captured Panthers in the immediate post-war period. French maintenance reports documented constant mechanical problems. Engine failures required replacement. Transmission breakdowns were routine. Steering malfunctions occurred frequently. Final drive failures were common. Despite having access to German spare parts stocks and German mechanics with Panther experience, the French could not keep the tanks operational reliably. By 1950, France had phased out captured German tanks entirely in favor of American Shermans and French-designed vehicles. What emerged from these experiences was a pattern. Panthers were maintenance-intensive, mechanically unreliable vehicles that required exceptional care and immediate access to spare parts. In controlled conditions with skilled mechanics and full parts availability, a Panther could function adequately for limited periods. In combat conditions with field maintenance, limited spare parts, and average crews under stress, Panthers broke down constantly. German tank crews who actually had to maintain and fight these machines understood the reality. Quotes attributed to crew members reflect frustration. One tanker reportedly said, "We spend more time repairing the Panther than fighting in it." Another, "The Panther is a beautiful machine when it works. The problem is making it work." The Tiger Manual, the Tiger Fable, included warnings that revealed design problems. The manual specifically cautioned, "Remember that it is not right and proper to torture the steering brake whenever one thinks it is necessary. This will break the engine quickly. Those who do this have no sense of tanks at all." This was not the language of a manual describing a reliable, well-engineered vehicle. This was the language describing a fragile vehicle requiring careful handling to avoid catastrophic failure. German combat reports from Normandy in June 1944 mentioned repeatedly that Panthers appeared to catch fire quickly. The phrase used was, "Der Panther brennt außerordentlich schnell." The Panther burns extraordinarily quickly. A report from Guderian dated June 28, 1944 stated this explicitly. The problem was known at the highest levels of German command. But fundamental engine design problems causing the fires were never adequately resolved. Meanwhile, Sherman production accelerated. By mid-1944, American factories were producing thousands of Shermans per month. Multiple variants were in production. The M4A1 with Continental radial engine, the M4A2 with twin General Motors diesel engines, the M4A3 with Ford GAA V8 gasoline engine, the M4A4 with Chrysler multibank engine. Different power plants, but standardized hulls and turrets allowed production flexibility. Improved models entered service. The M4A3E8, known as the Easy 8, featured improved suspension, wider tracks, better ground pressure, and the 76mm gun. The M4A3E2, known as the Jumbo, had additional frontal armor increased to 152mm, making it nearly impervious to German tank guns from the front. But even the standard Shermans with the 75mm gun remained effective, not because they were superior to German tanks in specifications, but because they were available. When German Tigers were broken down, Shermans were fighting. When German Panthers were awaiting spare parts, Shermans were advancing. When German tank battalions reported 30% operational availability, American tank battalions reported 70%. The strategic impact was overwhelming. American industrial capacity produced Shermans faster than combat could destroy them. German industrial capacity could not replace Tigers and Panthers fast enough. Total production of Tiger Y tanks, 1,347 units. Total production of Sherman tanks, 49,324 units. The numbers were not comparable. The industrial philosophies were not compatible. German military culture emphasized individual excellence. Elite crews in superior machines could defeat numerically superior enemies through tactical brilliance and technical advantage. This had worked in the early war years. In Poland, France, the Balkans, the initial invasion of the Soviet Union, smaller German forces with better training and better equipment had achieved dramatic victories. But by 1944, the balance had shifted. The Soviets had learned German tactics and adapted them. American and British forces had developed effective combined arms doctrine. Allied numerical superiority had become overwhelming. German technical advantages in individual tanks could not compensate for the reality that German tanks were breaking down while Allied tanks kept fighting. Otto Carius survived the war. He was captured by American forces in May 1945. After Germany's surrender, American intelligence officers interrogated him extensively. They wanted to know what German tank commanders thought of American and British tanks. They wanted to understand German perceptions of Allied equipment. Carius told them the truth. The Sherman was a good tank, not because it was better armed or better armored than German heavy tanks, but because it was reliable, maintainable, and available. In sustained operations, these qualities mattered as much as firepower and armor protection. American officers took notes. After the war, Carius returned to civilian life in Germany. He studied pharmacy at Heidelberg University. In 1956, he opened his own pharmacy in Hirschweiler-Pettersheim in the Rhineland. He named it Tiger Apotheke, Tiger Pharmacy, after the tank he had commanded. He ran the pharmacy until retiring in 2011. In 1960, Carius published a memoir titled Tigers in the Mud. The book described his experiences as a Tiger commander on the Eastern Front. It became one of the most detailed accounts of German tank warfare during World War II. Carius wrote about combat operations, tactical decisions, crew dynamics, and the constant struggle to keep Tigers operational. He did not romanticize the Tiger. He described it accurately: magnificent and terrible, devastating in combat when working properly, frustrating and unreliable mechanically. A tank that demanded everything from its crew just to keep running. He acknowledged that simpler tanks with better reliability often proved more effective in sustained operations than sophisticated machines plagued by mechanical problems. Carius died in January 2015 at age 92. His memoir remains in print. His pharmacy, now under different ownership, still carries the Tiger name. And historians studying World War II armored warfare still cite his experiences as evidence of the disconnect between German tank design aspirations and battlefield realities. The myth of German technical superiority in tank design persists in popular culture. The Tiger and Panther are remembered as fearsome machines. Their thick armor and powerful guns are celebrated. Their impressive specifications are repeated. Films and documentaries portray them as nearly invincible superweapons defeated only by overwhelming numbers. The reality was different. German heavy tanks were engineering marvels plagued by fundamental reliability problems. They consumed resources Germany could not afford. They required maintenance infrastructure Germany could not provide. They demanded fuel Germany did not have. They broke down at rates that negated their combat advantages. And when they broke down, they were useless, regardless of how impressive their specifications appeared on paper. The Sherman, by comparison, was pragmatic. It was not the most powerful tank. It was not the best armored tank. It was not the fastest tank, but it was reliable, it was maintainable, it was producible, it could be kept operational by average crews with basic tools, it could be manufactured in massive numbers without consuming scarce resources, it could fight continuously without requiring constant maintenance. These advantages, seemingly mundane compared to thick armor and powerful guns, proved decisive. The Sherman won not through individual superiority but through sustained availability. It won because American tank crews could rely on their machines. It won because American logistics could keep it supplied. It won because American industry could replace combat losses faster than Germany could destroy them. The Tiger's engine would not literally burn in 90 minutes of continuous operation. The title is hyperbolic, but the underlying truth was real. Tiger engines overheated frequently. They caught fire regularly. They failed mechanically at rates far exceeding Sherman failures. Keeping a Tiger operational required constant effort, specialized maintenance, ample spare parts, and favorable conditions. The Sherman required routine maintenance and kept running. German tank commanders who tested, captured Shermans at Kummersdorf and Birka understood this. They recognized that American tank design philosophy was different from German philosophy. They appreciated that reliability and producibility were genuine advantages, not symptoms of inferior engineering. They realized that the Sherman represented a coherent approach to armored warfare that prioritized sustained combat power over peak performance. But this understanding came too late. By the time German engineers fully appreciated American design philosophy, Germany had committed to producing sophisticated tanks with chronic reliability problems. Changing course would have meant halting production, redesigning vehicles, retooling factories, and accepting months of reduced output. Germany could not afford that. The Eastern Front consumed tanks continuously. The war demanded maximum production immediately. So, production continued. Tigers and Panthers rolled off assembly lines with known mechanical problems. Field units received tanks that required 10 hours of maintenance for every hour of combat. Tank crews performed heroics, keeping broken machines operational. And Germany's finest tank commanders, including aces like Otto Carius, spent as much time maintaining their vehicles as fighting in them. The winter of 1944-45 marked the final collapse of German armored forces on both fronts. In the West, the Ardennes offensive, Germany's last major counterattack, demonstrated with brutal clarity the consequences of unreliable armor. In the East, Soviet forces pushed relentlessly toward Germany itself, And in both theaters, mechanical breakdowns destroyed more German tanks than enemy fire. The Ardennes offensive, known to Americans as the Battle of the Bulge, began on December 16th, 1944. Germany committed its last operational reserves, including at least 150 Tiger II tanks, the heaviest and most powerful tank Germany produced during the war. The Tiger II, called King Tiger by Allied forces, weighed 75 tons. Its frontal armor measured 180 millimeters thick and angled. Its 88 millimeter Kirk 43 L-71 gun could penetrate 5 inches of armor at 2 kilometers. On paper, it was invincible. In practice, it was a mechanical disaster. The Tiger II used the same Maybach HL 230P30 engine as the Tiger I and Panther, but the Tiger II weighed nearly 20 tons more than the Tiger I, and the engine was massively underpowered for the vehicle's weight. Fuel consumption was catastrophic, averaging less than 1 kilometer per liter of fuel. Operational range was approximately 90 kilometers on roads under ideal conditions. Off-road, the range dropped to 50 kilometers or less. The transmission and final drives, already problematic in the lighter Tiger I's, were completely inadequate for the Tiger II's weight. Early Tiger II's suffered from constant mechanical breakdowns. Leaking seals and gaskets were common. The final drive and steering units, newly designed for the Tiger II, were particularly prone to failure. The double radius steering gear failed repeatedly under the stress of the vehicle's enormous weight. During the Ardennes offensive, Tiger II's broke down constantly. Some broke down before reaching the front lines. Others advanced into Belgium, ran out of fuel, and were abandoned by their crews. A few engaged Allied tanks successfully, demonstrating their devastating firepower, but most spent the battle sitting immobile, out of fuel, or broken down mechanically. The 503 Heavy SS Panzer Battalion reported that of 45 Sting Tiger II's assigned, only 8 were operational when the offensive began. The rest were undergoing repairs or awaiting spare parts. During the battle, more Tiger II's were lost to mechanical failure and fuel exhaustion than to enemy fire. Crews abandoned tanks that could not be recovered. Without fuel to tow disabled vehicles and without time to perform complex repairs under combat conditions, the Tiger II's were destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. The first 5 Tiger II's delivered to Panzer Lehr Division broke down before they could be used in combat and were destroyed to prevent capture. This was not enemy action. This was mechanical failure so severe that brand new tanks from the factory could not complete the journey to the front line. American forces encountered abandoned German tanks throughout the Ardennes. Photographs from December 1944 and January 1945 show Tiger II's, Panthers, and other German armor sitting beside roads, hatches open, intact but immobile. No combat damage visible, simply out of fuel or mechanically broken. American tank crews and engineers examined these vehicles with interest, documenting their sophisticated engineering and noting their mechanical failures. General Dwight Eisenhower walked past an overturned Tiger II during an inspection tour after the battle. Photographs captured the moment. The overlapping, non-interleaved steel rim road wheel arrangement was visible in the wreckage. Sophisticated suspension, complex design, impressive engineering, and completely impractical for sustained operations in winter conditions with limited fuel and maintenance support. Meanwhile, American Sherman tanks kept advancing. They consumed fuel at sustainable rates. Their simpler mechanical systems required less maintenance. Their air-cooled radial engines started reliably in sub-zero temperatures. When Shermans broke down, which happened, American recovery teams could usually repair them quickly or tow them to maintenance areas efficiently. The Sherman weighed 33 tons, compared to the Tiger II's 75 tons. Recovery was feasible. Soviet forces on the Eastern Front experienced similar patterns. In January 1945, the Vistula-Oder offensive and East Prussian offensive saw massive Soviet advances into German territory. German Tiger and Panther units attempted to stem the tide. They achieved local tactical successes, destroying Soviet tanks at impressive ratios. But the strategic situation was hopeless. The 5 03 Heavy SS Panzer Battalion claimed approximately 500 kills from January to April 1945 on the Eastern Front. They lost 45 Tiger IIs during the same period. Most of those 45 were abandoned and destroyed by their own crews after mechanical breakdowns or for lack of fuel. The kill ratio was impressive. The strategic impact was negligible. 500 Soviet tanks destroyed represented a fraction of Soviet armored strength. The Soviets could replace those losses within weeks. Germany could not replace the 45 Tiger IIs. German field reports from this period make grim reading. Units reported constantly that tanks were immobile due to mechanical failure. Fuel shortages prevented operations. Spare parts were unavailable. Skilled mechanics had been killed or captured. The infrastructure necessary to maintain sophisticated armored vehicles had collapsed. A March 1945 report from a German tank battalion noted, of 28 Panthers assigned, 7 are operational, 6 are awaiting engine replacement, 4 have transmission failures, 3 have final drive failures, 8 are immobile due to lack of fuel. The remaining tanks have various mechanical problems. This was typical. German armored units across all fronts reported similar statistics. The Americans, British, and Soviets, by comparison, maintained operational rates above 60% even during intensive combat operations. The tanks were simpler, more reliable, easier to maintain, and easier to supply. These advantages compounded over time. The longer the war continued, the wider the operational availability gap became. By April 1945, Germany's armored forces had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Individual tanks fought on, often with great effectiveness. Tank aces, like Carius, continued destroying enemy vehicles. But these were isolated successes in a strategic collapse. Germany had lost the armored war not because German tanks were inferior in direct combat, but because German tanks could not be kept operational in sufficient numbers. The statistics are stark. From 1942 through 1945, Germany produced approximately 1,347 Tiger I tanks, 492 Tiger II tanks, and approximately 6,000 Panthers. Total German heavy and medium tank production for the period was substantial but nowhere near Allied production. The United States alone produced 49,324 Sherman tanks between 1942 and 1945. The Soviet Union produced over 57,000 T-34 tanks during the same period. Britain produced thousands of Churchills, Cromwells, and other tanks. Combined Allied tank production exceeded German production by factors of 5 to 10, depending on the period analyzed. But the production numbers tell only part of the story. Operational availability rates were equally important. A tank that sits broken down, awaiting repairs, contributes nothing to combat power. A tank that burns through fuel at unsustainable rates becomes a liability when fuel supplies are constrained. A tank that requires specialized maintenance becomes unusable when skilled mechanics are unavailable. German tanks suffered from all these problems simultaneously. They were produced in insufficient numbers. They broke down at high rates. They consumed fuel Germany did not have. They required maintenance infrastructure Germany could not provide. The combination was fatal. The testing of captured Shermans at Kummersdorf in 1943 had revealed these problems as early. German engineers recognized that American design philosophy emphasized reliability over sophistication. They understood that the Sherman's simplicity was a feature, not a bug. They appreciated that easy maintenance and high operational availability were genuine combat advantages. But German military culture and industrial capacity prevented adaptation. Germany had committed to producing sophisticated tanks with known reliability problems. The investment in tooling, training, and supply chains was enormous. Changing course would have required years Germany did not have. Instead, production continued along established lines, accepting high operational loss rates from mechanical failure as unavoidable. American tank tactics evolved to exploit German mechanical vulnerabilities. Allied commanders understood that German heavy tanks, while formidable in direct combat, could be defeated through maneuver and attrition, force German tanks to move frequently, make them operate in difficult terrain, engage them in extended operations that stressed mechanical systems. wait for them to break down. British tank tactics in northwest Europe from summer 1944 onward specifically exploited Panther and Tiger unreliability, force engagements into close terrain where German tanks could not use their superior gun range, keep them moving and maneuvering until something broke mechanically. A disabled Tiger was as combat ineffective as a destroyed Tiger, and Tigers disabled themselves regularly without needing to be shot. German reports noted that many Tigers and Panthers abandoned on the battlefield had no combat damage, only mechanical failures that crews could not repair in field conditions. Photographs from Normandy, the Ardennes, and the final battles in Germany showed German heavy tanks sitting beside roads, intact but immobile, eventually destroyed by their own crews or captured by advancing Allied forces. The French Army's post-war experience with captured German tanks provided additional evidence. France operated captured Panthers through the late 1940s. French maintenance reports documented exactly the problems German crews had experienced: engine failures requiring replacement, transmission breakdowns, steering malfunctions, final drive failures. Despite having access to German spare parts stocks captured in depots and German mechanics with Panther experience working as laborers, the French could not keep Panthers operational reliably. French tank commanders complained that Panthers required constant maintenance. One French officer reportedly stated, "The Panther is an excellent tank when it works. Unfortunately, it works less often than it does not work." By 1950, France had abandoned captured German tanks entirely. They were replaced with American Shermans and early French post-war designs. The Shermans, despite being older and less powerful than Panthers, proved more reliable and easier to maintain. Soviet forces had similar experiences with captured German tanks. The Soviets captured hundreds of German tanks during their advances from 1943 through 1945. Some were pressed into service temporarily. Most were sent to testing facilities for evaluation. Soviet test reports on Tigers and Panthers documented extensive mechanical problems: overheating engines, transmission failures, steering problems, high fuel consumption. Soviet evaluators concluded that German heavy tanks were unsuitable for sustained operations under Soviet conditions. The sophisticated engineering that German designers considered advanced, Soviet engineers considered impractical. Overlapping road wheels collected mud and froze solid in winter. Complex transmissions failed under stress. Narrow tolerance engines seized when maintenance was imperfect. The Soviets preferred their own T-34 design, which was crude by German standards, but robust and reliable under harsh conditions. American tankers who fought against German heavy tanks developed realistic assessments of their opponents. Yes, the Tiger and Panther had thicker armor and more powerful guns than the Sherman. Yes, in a direct frontal engagement at long range, German tanks had advantages. But German tanks broke down constantly. They ran out of fuel frequently. They were often immobile when American forces encountered them. American tank crews learned not to be intimidated by German heavy tanks' reputation. Tactics evolved: use numbers, maneuver to flanks where German armor was thinner, wait for mechanical failures, call in air support, engage with tank destroyers mounting 90mm guns. The Sherman's mobility and reliability meant American tanks could choose when and where to engage. The M36 tank destroyer, mounting a 90mm M3 gun, could penetrate Tiger frontal armor at 1,000 meters using standard ammunition, beyond 2,000 meters using high-velocity, armor-piercing ammunition. American forces had weapons capable of defeating German heavy tanks, combined with superior numbers, better logistics, and higher operational availability rates. American armored forces overwhelmed German opposition through sustained pressure. By May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended. Allied forces occupied Germany, and Allied intelligence officers began detailed examinations of German tank production facilities, testing grounds, and captured documents. What they found confirmed what combat experience had taught. German tank design philosophy had prioritized specifications over reliability. Engineers had pursued maximum performance in individual categories: armor thickness, gun penetration, suspension sophistication, without adequate attention to overall system reliability and maintainability. The result was tanks that impressed in demonstrations but failed in sustained operations. American observers noted that German factories were still producing Tigers and Panthers in April 1945, even as Allied forces approached. Tanks rolled off assembly lines with known mechanical problems. Quality control had collapsed. Spare parts were unavailable. But production continued because stopping would have meant admitting that the entire design philosophy was flawed. The lessons learned influenced post-war tank development. American tank designers emphasized reliability and maintainability in new designs. The M26 Pershing, which saw limited service in the final months of the war, incorporated Sherman's reliability principles with heavier armor and a 90mm gun. Later, American tanks, the M46 Patton series and eventually the M60, prioritized operational availability and ease of maintenance alongside firepower and protection. Soviet tank design evolved similarly. The T-34 was replaced by the T-44 and T-54 series, which retained the T-34's emphasis on robustness and reliability while improving armor and firepower. Soviet designers never pursued German-style sophistication. They remained committed to tanks that could be operated by conscript crews with minimal training and maintained under harsh conditions with limited tools. British tank development took longer to incorporate these lessons. Immediate post-war British tanks, the Centurion and Conqueror, initially suffered from reliability problems similar to German tanks. Complex mechanical systems, sophisticated engineering, chronic breakdowns. Eventually, British designers revised their approach, and later, Centurion variants became known for reliability and durability. The Sherman itself remained in service for decades after World War II. American forces used upgraded Shermans in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. Israeli forces used modified Shermans through the 1960s and 70s. Other nations operated Shermans into the 1980s. The basic design proved so robust and maintainable that successive upgrades and modifications kept the platform relevant long after more sophisticated tanks had been retired. The Tiger, by comparison, disappeared immediately after the war. Surviving Tigers were scrapped or placed in museums. No nation attempted to operate captured Tigers in combat. The maintenance requirements were prohibitive. The fuel consumption was unsustainable. The spare parts were unavailable. The Tiger existed only as a museum piece, a reminder of German engineering ambition, unconstrained by practical considerations. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.